I've been watching a lot of that Xbox documentary, the Power On documentary. Some of you guys know about it. I've been talking about it a little bit here and there. It's a very interesting thing because when you get to go behind the scenes and see some of the things that happen, it really kind of blows your mind, and it makes you all the more thankful and excited about where we're at right now in video games. I mean, for instance, Grand Theft Auto 3 could have very well been an Xbox exclusive at one point. So that's something that I think a lot of people probably, take for granted. A lot of people look at video games and just assume that we'll always have them, or we'll always have consoles, or we'll always have this or that, and it's not always the case. And I have to point out that when it comes down to it, like, Sony will copy Microsoft if something's good, and Microsoft will copy Sony if something's good. That's just the way these things go. Obviously they kind of went back and forth with each other on a few different topics that were pretty interesting. When you think about it now, one of the topics that I find to be incredibly interesting when it comes to this is how I thought at the beginning of the PS4 era, Sony really used indie games and indie game makers, developers, as a crutch, sort of as a way to make up for what I felt was a lackluster set of exclusives and a lackluster content on their own, right? Sony suddenly found themselves in this really weird position where they were selling PS4s like crazy, just absolutely destroying the Xbox in sales, and yet Xbox actually had what's traditionally helps, which is like big exclusives and stuff like that. And at the same time, Sony was really relying on a lot of these indie games, and everybody was using these indie games as a reason to buy a PlayStation 4. And it's just so funny how things kind of go back and forth. And now it's sort of flip-flopped, right? So we know that at the beginning of the Xbox One era, Xbox, thanks to Don Matrick, had a parity clause, which meant games had to either launch first on Xbox or at the same time, or they had to have exclusive content for the Xbox. And even Phil Spencer said that was to make Xbox gamers feel like they were premium gamers and had a first-class experience. Now, I'm going to get into this because Sony is now taking an initiative that could help them in the long term, and I find this to be incredibly fascinating, and it's going to be a good video, and I know you don't want to miss it, so stay tuned. Hey there everyone, I'm the Crapgamer, and this of course is Crapgamer Reviews, your home for gaming news, opinions, reviews, and much more. You'll probably notice some changes around here, but that shouldn't stop you from giving us a like, and maybe even at the least consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. Thank you so much for choosing to spend some of your free time with me today. It really means a lot. Thank you very much. Happy holidays and all that kind of good stuff. Sony is in a mode that wants to repair its relationship with indie partners. The platform holder is responding to complaints by pledging to improve its communications process and actually improve opportunities for small developers. This is a win for everybody. Listen, I don't want it to sound like all of a sudden I'm a big indie guy, right? Like, I know a lot of people think that I'm an indie developer, that I hate indie games. I don't. The problem is, if you look at the stores in Xbox or PlayStation or Nintendo, it's inundated with just indie after indie after indie. And a lot of them are just cut and paste of stuff that I played 30 years ago. So, and 30 years ago did it better. But I do enjoy the occasional indie game. Like, I think people have when I say indie game, a lot of times I'm talking about like these 8-bit games, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not a huge fan of those. Stuff like Kena, Bridge of Spirits, or, I'm going to download the gunk and give that a try. Stuff like that I look at more as taking the place of the AA space. So yeah, I kind of look at that as, a necessary thing. And, something like Firewatch. I've been very on point for years about talking about how I love Firewatch. But anyway, more on to the point about Sony. Back in July, a number of indie publishers publicly called out Sony for its apparent ongoing dismissal of the immense challenges facing small developers who are trying to publish games on PlayStation platforms. While publicly Sony offered no official comment on these complaints at the time, it appears that the company was quietly listening after all, and has recently begun to take some action. Looking back on a conversation with publishers at the time, a number of key issues were brought to light. Sony, indie publishers, and developers said had overly complex tools and forms, unclear processes, and poor communications with its indie partners when it came to getting answers, guidance, or issues actually resolved. They also expressed that while discoverability was an industry-wide issue, Sony was at best indifferent or at worst actively adversal to these struggles, making PlayStation a very challenging platform for indie game sales. What's more, it sounds like the vocal indies who spoke up in July, were not alone in feeling this way. And actually, IGN, which I'm going to link this article, has obtained a copy of the document entitled 2021 Global Partner Survey Results, which was sent out to a number of Sony partner publishers and developers as a follow-up to a survey that was conducted sometime prior. The findings document, in short, only 3 pages long and does not specifically mention the public complaints from the past summer, but it does identify 3 target areas for quote-unquote continued improvement. Based on the results of the survey, all of which directly correspond to issues the indie publishers brought up on social media and in articles. First, there's reducing complexity, with Sony pledging, among other things, to improve communication channels, which I personally think is going to be super important going forward, basically so they can make decisions. Second, Sony promised to give all of its active publishing and development partners access to better game sales, engagement, and promotion analytics, as well as improve discoverability. And finally, Sony says it will monetize its toolset and improve its ticketing system, documentation, and customer service efforts for partner issues. Now, after viewing the document, IGN did follow up with a number of indies they spoke to over the summer. Based on their responses, it appears that Sony has already taken some actions to improve communications and partnership with its smaller partners. Like Akupara Games CEO David Logan says that both their account manager and head of PlayStation creators, Greg Rice, reached out to his company personally following the publication of the original article. They were obviously crushed at the news, and it was clear that the account managers at Sony had been working hard for a long time to push through a lot of the ideas that indie developers flagged in the initial discussion. After the articles that seemed to give a huge boost to initiatives they had already been planning, because rapidly after Sony started rolling out a bunch of big changes. What are the big changes? Logan, who says he's always had a solid communication frequency, says that his issues with Sony support response times have drastically improved. For one, while previously he had complained of having a support ticket open for 9 months, he says now response times are down to an average of about 5 days, with most responses coming within 24 to 48 hours. Meanwhile, others they spoke to had previously struggled with Sony's communication. They says that the issue has improved across the board. He said it's always slow dealing with big major companies, but it definitely feels more fluid and natural. So it looks like Sony is kind of wanting to get back into that whole aspect that really helped them go out there and, win over people in the first place with the PS4. I find it so odd. I don't understand, right? Like, look, the Xbox 360 was so successful. Why? Because it appealed to hardcore gamers. It was cheaper than the competition. It was super easy for developers to make games for, right? We had all of these amazing things as to the reason why an Xbox 360s had sold and had done so well. Now, with that being said, they screwed it all up and made it all backwards with the Xbox One. The more expensive console, the harder console to develop for third parties, and it made it, less powerful and less a focus on hardcore gamers. And what happened? Sony came out. They had a powerful console focused on hardcore gamers, easier to develop for. And then we go that to the PS5. The PS5 and Xbox Series X are both easy to develop for, but you have Microsoft switching and kind of being friendly to the developers and going after hardcore, and you have Sony kind of, going away from the indie developers, and that's exactly what helped them win so well with the PS4 in the first place. Like, these games have to cut the slack from the exclusives, you know what I mean? Like, there's like the big third-party stuff, and then you got to have some of that smaller stuff in between. Like, we're to the point where we get games almost every day released, and you got to keep that going. So, with that being said, I'm going to link it. What do you guys think? Is this something that you feel like Sony should improve on? Is it something that all companies should improve on? I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Rack 'em up, fact 'em up, Crap Gamer 'em up. Thanks for watching. Crap Gamer out.